Right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us again for this session of our Summer Learning Series webinar. Today's session is titled Patient Engagement in Action, a case study in patient-oriented research. And so I'm quite happy to say that we will be featuring a panel of guest speakers from Child Rights Ready or Not project that's currently working towards addressing the gap that's in the transition of care for pediatric patients once they enter the adult healthcare system. So really the hope is that we'll learn a bit about their project and really get a sense of what their experience has been like throughout this process of engaging patients through their research. Sorry, hold on just one moment. All right. Oh, we got too excited again. We lost all our slides. All right, so there was just two items we wanted to run by real quick to get us sorted. And so since we'll be opening this up to some questions and discussion later on, I just wanted to highlight two features on the platform if you haven't joined us before. So on your control panel, you will see that there is a little circle with a hand. And if you were to press that, you will raise your hand. Since by default, all attendees are muted. And we'll just call on you once we have that signal, and then you're welcome to relay your comment or your question. And then we also have an additional feature where you can type your question for input. So if you feel more comfortable in running it that way, feel free to put your input in through that venue, and then on our end we'll read the question out to the panelists and get their feedback. So before we hand it over to our guests, we just wanted to again get a sense of who is all on the line today. So if you have joined us before, this is a repeat slide. So we'll just activate a poll in a few moments, and feel free to just select the option that you most readily identify with, and it'll give us a great sense to see who's on the call, and it'll be interesting to see how that shapes the discussion that we will have in a moment. So hold on, I will activate the poll, and yeah, and feel free to relay your preference. All right, so we'll give it a few more seconds. I think we almost have you all. We're at 90%. All right, so it looks like we have a mix again, and the majority of folks on the line today are from our research group. So yeah, no, keep that in mind, and as we continue on, we'll hopefully have you contribute to our discussion. So it's my pleasure to introduce you to Connie, Barb, and Sonia from the Ready or Not project, and I'll move the screen over to you all, and yeah, feel free to take it away. Just a moment. As we deal with that. All right, Sonia, you should have the prompt.
So you should be seeing my title page, which has our Ready or Not project title. Everyone's good? Excellent. So on behalf of the Child Bright Project 3.3.
Sorry, Sonia, we're still seeing the placeholder screen, unfortunately. So yeah, so just click the button to show your main screen.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that.
Oh, no worries. There we go. Wonderful. All right, go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. So again, on behalf of the Child Bright Ready or Not Project 3.3, we'd just like to welcome you to today's webinar, where we'll be talking about our patient engagement experiences in the Ready or Not project. I'm just trying to advance my slide. Oh.
So you should be able to just click
sorry
the
about that. I'm a newbie. Okay, so we just wanted to quickly introduce ourselves. So today, myself, Connie, and Barb are going to be presenting this webinar to you about our experiences with the Ready or Not PFAC. So we'll each introduce ourselves. My name is Sonia Strom, and I'm a research coordinator at CanChild at McMaster University, working with Dr. Jan Willem Gorder. And I'm one of the two coordinators on the Ready or Not project. Barb is the other coordinator, and she'll tell you more about her role. My role has mostly been to coordinate our stakeholder engagement activities, including the PFAC, as well as our qualitative research interviewing that we've been doing. So Connie, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, hi, everyone. My name is Connie Putterman, and I'm really happy to be here today. I am part of the PFAC team for the Ready or Not project, and I think I was one of the initial PFAC members on that team. I'm also a lead on the Child Right KT committee, so I share the co-leads with Jonathan Weiss and Keiko Shako Thomas, and as well, I'm a longtime advocate for involvement and engagement in autism and neurodevelopmental research. So I've been around a long time, and I'm currently now enrolled in my doing my second year of a Master's in Health Sciences in the Translational Research Program at University of Toronto. So a little bit about me.
Thanks. And Barb?
And I'm Barb Galuppi. As Sonia mentioned, I'm one of the other research coordinators at CanChild Center for Childhood Disability Research, which is at McMaster, working with Jan Willem Gorder. I have been coordinating multi-site clinical trials for a while through my work at CanChild, and my major role, although I've been involved so far in the first stage of the study, my major role will be in coordinating the next stage, which will be a randomized control trial. And we should also maybe mention there's a third person that coordinates with us who is the project manager for this first phase in developing the app, and her name's Alicia, and she's at McGill. Great. So we wanted to start off with a bit of an overview of Project 3.3. So it's the third project in the Bright Futures Theme 3. We call it the Ready or Not Project, and it brought together co-PIs Ariane Morelli at McGill, Jan Willem Gorder at McMaster, and Kush Maria at Sick Kids, each of them having led clinical and research programs related to transition from pediatric to adult healthcare, where the need for technology-based interventions were indicated for youth. In the first phase of the project, our team has worked together with healthcare professionals, technology designers, youth, and families to create the MyReady Transition app. The app is designed for young people between 15 and 17 years old who are in pediatric healthcare and one day will be entering adult healthcare. It's designed for people with cerebral palsy, spina bifida, epilepsy, autism spectrum disorder, or fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, and who are all beginning to take charge of managing their own healthcare. Users have their own personal mentor to help them make their way through the app's journey in the city. By visiting different places in the city, watching videos, and completing challenges, the app hopefully will make it fun to learn and practice managing medical information and other skills to help them get ready for adult health care. So this is a screenshot of the app's landing page that we're showing. And we're now planning for the second phase of the project, which will be the randomized control trial, or RCT, where we'll be recruiting youth in Alberta, Ontario, Quebec, and the Maritimes in order to determine whether the group who use the app will have improved transition readiness and specifically improved self-management and self-advocacy skills compared to youth who receive usual care. So our project may be a bit unique compared to other research projects in the Child Bright Network because of the two phases. The first phase, developing the app, intervention, and now just starting into the second phase to do the RCT to evaluate the app. So a lot of the patient engagement experiences so far have been more about the design and build of the app rather than a typical research trial. We think you'll find that some of the lessons learned are applicable no matter what the nature of the engagement. So this timeline highlights some of the ways we're engaging youth patients with brain-based disabilities, families, and healthcare stakeholders as we co-create the app. We started out with an interactive brainstorming session as a way to reach out and get started. So participants were trying out some e-health technology and sharing thoughts and suggestions, talking about experiences, expectations, and priorities for healthcare transition support, and sharing thoughts about what successful healthcare transition means. This was a great stakeholder event and a good starting point, but we found that we needed other strategies to find more patient and parent partners. So an action that came out of this meeting was to develop a Patient and Family Advisory Council, or PFAC. A few of the young people who attended the brainstorm went on to be part of our PFAC, and then some others joined us through advertisements on the Child Bright website, and then others through connections with some of the researchers on the team. We now have 5 parents and 3 youth who are active on our PFAC. We've been working in partnership with our PFAC to plan iterative qualitative interviews, focus groups, and other interactive usability testing activities for the app with parents and youth to ensure that the app matches the needs and interests of youth. So hopefully they'll be motivated to use it in the end. PFAC members have participated in discussions about the content and the look and feel of the app by looking at storyboards and video demos, and have provided feedback or helped edit the content directly. For the Brainchild Partners Conference, you'll see on the timeline, we created a video where researchers, patient, and parent partners talked about what meaningful involvement partnering in research means to them, and we'll share the link to that video at the end of this presentation. And maybe I'll just pause at this point and ask Connie if there's anything you'd like to add about the timeline or how you came to be involved.
Yeah, I think as you were talking, Barb, there was a couple of things that stood out when you put this together and I looked at it. And one of them in particular was something that you had said about the idea that the first phase was more about this app development phase. And then and I think that really helped to clarify and differentiate the phases of this project, because I think the timeline, it was much faster, the process of trying to get the app development done. So as a PFAC member, it didn't feel like a typical research project. It was really about our input into app development. So that was something that stood out for me, and it was actually very helpful to understand it in that way. But the part that I really wanted to focus on was how I came into it in the beginning, and the idea of the interactive brainstorming sessions. And I was invited to come to a interactive brainstorming session. I think it was very close to, it wasn't the actual session that you ran, but it was a session that Jan Willem had run around to get some feedback for another one of his transition projects. And I think for me, it was a really valuable opportunity. I mean, first, Jan Willem invited me, and I think I really wanted to attend and really valued that invitation. And I think the other part was the face-to-face brainstorming session really got my interest up into being involved. And I think the idea that face-to-face meeting at the initial phases of brainstorming, not just it tweaked my interest, but it also really engages me as a parent participant in starting to be part of the process. And so I found that really, really valuable. And I also learned about other people in the room and what they were doing. So it was a really good start. I think the chance to share and learn was really important. I see on the screen, there's a picture of us during that brainstorming session. So that is a takeaway for me, that the way that I came into the project was because it tweaked I was invited at first to the session, and then it really tweaked my interest. And I think that may be one lesson learned for how parents or patient involvement begins, has an impact throughout the process.
Thanks, Connie. And I'll ask people to sort of keep this in mind as we move forward, because I think this idea about engaging in conversations like this will have relevance to another point that we make at a later part of our presentation. And just to go back to the event that you're referring to, was the Transition Stakeholder Engagement event held at McMaster University in June of 2017. And it was an event to update stakeholders about really the transition program of research that Dr. Gorder leads, and to brainstorm about transition in general, as well as it was about informing the development of these e-health tools. So it really benefited a number of projects, including Project 3.3, thinking about how these tools can support young people preparing for transition and having all those different stakeholders provide their input on that. Thank you, Connie. So to ensure that patients and families as partners really feel like their ideas are being authentically valued, it's important, we recognize that it's important to evaluate the success of such partnerships, so partnerships like the one we have with our PFAC. And so this slide here just shares a few of our ideas around how we would evaluate the success of engagement. And I think it's important that we also mention at this point that we haven't necessarily done this perfectly, and we've been learning along the way about how we can improve. But we definitely recognize and believe in the importance of this. So first of all, thinking about what is the experience for everyone on the team. So how is it going for researchers? How is it going for partners? What are partners getting out of being involved? And do they believe they're contributing to the success of the project, for example? And my next slide that I share with you will give more of a concrete strategy of something that we did do with relation to evaluating this. But I think it's something that we didn't necessarily plan for very well in what we call phase 1 of this project, and something that we've been able to sort of reflect on and think about moving forward through the next phase, so moving into the RCT, how we can build these things in more meaningfully. And be asking some of these questions, and also in relation to the idea of evaluating before, during, and after engagement. So Barb and another one of our PFAC members, for example, have been putting a lot of effort into looking into resources that look at how to evaluate patient engagement or family engagement. And just as an example of a tool that they've come across recently that we thought would be of interest to people who are listening today, is something called the Plane Tree self-assessment tool. And this is, I provided a link on another slide that will link you to planetree.org, where you can take a look at this tool. But essentially it's a 10-question self-assessment tool that's designed to support organizations or teams like ours engaging the current state of their efforts to partner with patients and families. So items are rated on a 5-point scale ranging from strongly agree to strongly disagree. And I'll give you a couple of examples of the items on this tool. So for example, one of the items is that patient and family advisor input is the predominant driver of the Patient and Family Partnership Council's agenda. versus a staff-driven agenda. So then that would be rated on the 5-point scale of how much someone agreed with that point. Another point or item on the scale is staff members who work closely with patient and family advisors have received training on strategies for encouraging dialogue and nurturing these partnerships. So we understand that evaluating the success will enhance our partnership and contribute to a stronger community of practice. So moving on to the next slide, this was the more concrete example I was alluding to that we put into place in recognizing that it was a time in our project where we felt we needed to check in, and that sort of resulted from some feedback that we were getting from our PFAC, and our own sort of ambivalence about how things were going. And so this activity I had done before, actually in more of a teaching context, but we thought would be a really helpful activity for engaging with our PFAC to say, what is it that we should start doing? So what are the things that we're not doing, but people think that we should be doing? What new ideas do they have for how we can work together better? And then what should we stop doing? So what's not working very well for us? What's not having the desired outcome? And then, of course, what can we continue to do? So what are the things that we're doing well or people like or that's working? And so the next slide that I have for you is sort of a listing of all of the things that came out of that conversation. And the way that I'm going to present it is I'm sort of going to share my perspective as a staff member on the project and sort of what I heard and how we sort of addressed many of those things, but also giving Connie a chance with each of these points to chime in and kind of give her family partner perspective. So I'll start by talking about defining expectations and roles. So the idea of establishing a terms of reference for this project was something that resulted from one of our earliest meetings with the PFAC, and we worked to draft a document using a template that was actually shared from one of our PFAC members that helped to provide some background of the project, the role that PFAC members would play, and what participation would look like for them. So, for example, that they would be invited to contribute regularly at biweekly or monthly teleconferences through different phases of a research project. And at that time, we did our best to anticipate what some of those activities would be at those different phases. The terms of reference also included information about honoraria in appreciation of the time, effort, and expertise that partners would lend to the project. And that was guided by Child Rights Guidelines for Patient Partner Compensation, and working together as a PFAC to estimate what would be minimum time commitments for different activities sort of in order to receive that honoraria. So I think our experience was that for those who were on the PFAC sort of and then were involved early on, they had a bit more of an opportunity to be involved at that stage and really help to shape and provide input for the terms of reference. But I think as the project progressed and our focus became informing the development of the app, the pace of the project became very, very fast, and we weren't really revisiting the document. And so some of our newer members were probably less clear about their roles and expectations. And so I think our lesson learned is that it's something that needs to be revisited more frequently, revisited when there's new members that come on board. But I'll pass it over to Connie to comment on her experience and just a comment around expectations and roles when you're a family partner.
Yeah, thank you, Sonia. I think the part about the clarifying expectations and doing and revisiting that exercise along the way would be really valuable. I think part of it is to just revisit the idea of what can people expect moving forward. And I think it's okay to say you don't always know. You can't always predict some of the, the research process, but you can't necessarily predict always the time commitment. Sometimes the commitments were greater than others, so I really think it's valuable to be able to either put some time frames to it, but really qualify it by saying, but maybe in this phase we're less sure, and certainly to check in with PFAC members to see and how what their expectations are, and if it's meeting their expectations, or if there's ways that they might want to contribute in a different way that still might enable them to be part of it. So it's just a constant check-in. And one of the things that we talked about, I talked with Sonia and Barb a little bit about was, creating things like a partnership charters that outline people's roles and what they do, and that it's varying role, like people don't always have to do the same thing on a PFAC committee, and to still feel involved. So it's a way of laying it out and agreeing to some of the terms up front, but knowing that it's a working document. I think the other thing is that it would be really important to ask PFAC members, like, how the different ways they work, and maybe trying to cater to their ways of working, or try and use their ways of working to enhance the project. Because I think the ultimate goal in the end is to build partners on the team. And the idea of partnership is to bring everybody's perspective in that enables them to maximize their potential within that partnership. So it's finding ways to work with people who have different skill sets and different expectations. And really, the other thing I wanted to say was that the thing that we have to give the most is what we've got in our currency is time, and we're giving our time and our perspective. And I think so there's a way to be able to maximize people's the use of the time in a way that makes people feel like they're valued and contributing. So that's how I see that number, that first defining expectations, really important to the success of a project, I think.
Great, thanks, Connie. So another thing that we learned through our Stop, Start, Continue activity was that something we could start doing is offering a collection of resources. Now, this is related to the topic of defining expectations and roles. As we learned, we really could have done a better job of orienting new partners to the team. As you've already heard us speak of members coming into the PFAC sort of at different times and in different ways. So at one point, a few months into the project, we created an advertisement that was posted to the ChildBright website for recruitment of more youth or young adult representation on the team. And we had 2 young adults who reached out to us with an application to participate on the PFAC. And it was our assumption that because they were recruited through ChildBright, so they had familiarity with the network, and including the different programs, projects, mandate, et cetera. But in our experience, we sort of learned that that wasn't the case. And so now we've talked about different ways, including developing an orientation package or offering sort of one-on-one telephone calls to orient and onboard new partners. It's always a bit of a challenge too when we have people who are kind of coming in and out at different times. And maybe, Connie, you could even speak to your experience with that. And I know recently Barb and myself have had a little bit more opportunity to sort of reorient Connie to some of the things that maybe she's missed in the last little while with the project, and how useful that's been from her perspective.
Yeah, I think that what we had talked about was the fact that as the project developed, there were times that like I know personally, I came in and out of the project, and there were ways and times that I felt like I was contributing more often and maybe towards the beginning. And as the PFAC grew and different members came on and added their ideas, then I may have backed away a bit. So I do also really appreciate that you can't always be fully engaged all the time as a PFAC member, because things happen. But yet there was something about what I found is that I think the idea of PFAC members coming in and out at various times was a little bit disruptive for keeping the group kind of focused. So that was some of my personal experience, and it was also, as I said before, really quick timelines because it was much more around app development and feedback, almost in like a focus group kind of environment. So it was not so traditional. So if that was sort of my experience as going through that. But I think going forward, there's, the RCT will bring on much more of a traditional research process focus. So then there'll be more opportunity to know how that's going to roll out differently than the first phase.
Yeah, I agree. And thank you for that, Connie. And I think it's a good segue into my next point. So this optimizing opportunities for engagement has been a challenge, probably one of the biggest ones that we've faced, including accommodating the needs of a PFAC who include youth and young adults, all of whom are students and in school, parents of children with complex health conditions, and representation all across Canada, from Eastern to Western Canada. So scheduling meetings where we can expect 100% attendance is something we sort of realize may not always be feasible. So offering flexibility and choice to our partners has been important so that they can participate in other ways. For example, providing their feedback or input via email correspondence or via a written document or one-to-one Skype or telephone calls. We've also tried to schedule meetings that alternate monthly between afternoon and evening time slots. And we've started recording meetings and sharing a link to the recording along with our detailed meeting minutes. So those are ways that we've tried to do this, but ultimately it does become a challenge, and there's no real solution for how you deal with when people do need to step back at times, and coming in and out can be a challenge. And then I'll move down to building a reciprocal relationship. There's a little bit of overlap between optimized opportunities for engagement and the importance of that for building a reciprocal relationship. So I'll hold off on getting Connie's comments until I go through this point. But essentially, this is something we know and believe is critical for effective and purposeful partnerships, but something we've struggled with at times. And I would say particularly because of the nature of the project, being this fast-paced app development and not following the flow of a typical research study. So as a result, we've learned from PFAC how important, it is for us to be accountable and to be able to demonstrate back to them how their feedback's been used and considered and incorporated into the app. So again, the fast pace has made it a little bit challenging for us to build in the time to actually show that to PFAC, demonstrate it to them. And it's not that it didn't happen. And I think that's something that, how can we ensure them that we're doing that when we don't have the time to actually set aside without, of course, and valuing their time and not wanting to take up more meeting time than is necessary. So that's one of the things that we recognize we could do better, and we're trying to think about that moving forward. We also had a recent suggestion with respect to how engagement can be optimized, the suggestion of something like a Facebook page. We haven't landed exactly on what this will be, but likely something like a Facebook page that can be dedicated to conversations about transition. So thinking back to what sparked Connie's interest in this project in the first place, being in this environment where transition was the topic, and she was engaged in stakeholder discussions about transition in general, the app development more specifically, but the idea that our PFAC is looking for a place where they have permission to talk about all things related to transition. So not necessarily that it has to specifically relate to the project, although it could, but to really foster building a reciprocal relationship and to support indirect ways or spin-offs that do relate to the project needs. So I'll turn that over to you, Connie.
Yeah, I think those points that you made, Sonia, just now sparked some reflection for me. And I have been reflecting quite a bit about it, since we started talking about this. And I think that the point that you made about demonstrating back to the PFAC members how their feedback has been considered or used and incorporated is really, really important. Because I would really want to know how how my efforts have made a difference, and then what knowledge is being learned and gained and added to the project. And at the same time, I would want you to know, you as the research team, to know what I've gained from it. And because I think what I've gained is really important too. And I, just given maybe who I am, I really like to talk about that. So, perhaps, as an example is to give opportunities, or find opportunities or ways for all the partners to talk about what they've gained from it and how it matters to each both the research partners and the PFAC partners. And then I just want to say one other thing that I've reflected on a lot about, and this may also help to build reciprocal relationships, but I really have thought about what motivates me to do what I do, and to be more engaged. And as you said, Sonia, part of it is the curiosity about the research and really interested in transitions. And there's a part that opportunity I want to help, and I want to learn, and maybe I want to express what I've learned to others, or enable the team to learn from it and to show that it may have impact. And I think that some of those things that motivate me, I'm really motivated by being a partner in something. So I think understanding that's my motivations, and maybe somebody else might have very different motivations, but I think it's understanding the motivations of everyone and why they're there would really help to build that reciprocal relationship. And again, as you said, Sonia, you're really looking at, you and Barb, are looking at ways in which to get that information more out in the open amongst people, so everybody understands if it's meeting their needs. So that's mainly what I really reflected on over the course of this exercise. And how can you create an atmosphere where PFAC members want to share that, feel like partners, and that they, are valued, and also are also appreciating the research process too. So there's a two-way street there. So that's just my reflections on that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I love your idea of sort of exploring motivations among different members early on, which is something we could have improved as well. So I'll move now on. I'll pass along things to Barb, who's going to talk about continuing engagement during our RCT phase.
Thank you. So we've heard a little bit about our experiences so far, and now the next few minutes we'll be talking about how we'll take some of the things we learned to help inform what we do moving forward. So as we prepare for the RCT phase of our project, we envision continued and ongoing engagement with our PFAC, building on some of the lessons learned, so related to expectations and roles, resources, opportunities for engagement, and reciprocal relationships again. So under expectations and roles, reestablishing shared understanding of roles and expectations in the RCT phase. So for our next PFAC meeting, our plan is to focus the discussion on a description of the RCT study protocol and an overview of the timeline and the series of activities to come, so that we can hear from PFAC about how they see themselves being involved throughout the RCT phase in things like study planning, recruitment, data collection, knowledge translation, or dissemination of results, and also dissemination of their patient engagement experiences. So this will be a good opportunity to define expectations and goals for engagement as we start the next phase. And then with discussion and refinement of those details with the whole team, we can come to a consensus on our patient engagement plan, and eventually how we want to evaluate the engagement that we have planned. And Sonia talked about some evaluation ideas earlier. So under collection of resources, working with ASU on tailored intro to patient engagement training. So I've been working with another PFAC member, Joanne Moselle, gathering and reviewing patient engagement training information to develop a tailored presentation for all members of our project team, which is especially timely as we're expanding the group for the RCT phase and wanting to set the culture for engagement and interaction. So we've actually worked both with the Ontario Spore Support, OSU, and the Maritimes Spore Support Unit. Next, thinking about what we've learned from our engagement so far and opportunities for engagement in the next phase, continuing to hold the PFAC meetings and research team meetings in parallel with the PFAC RCT liaison facilitating an exchange between the groups, collaborating on study materials, recruitment protocols for feasibility and acceptability in lay terms, and reasonable time commitments for study subjects. PFAC involvement in data collection and analysis. So just as researchers, clinicians, and trainees, and staff like me, with all of our unique and varied perspectives and experiences, just as we're all part of the collaborative research team, when we think of patient and parent partners in the same way as members of the research team, it really brings a richness to all of our discussions. Thinking creatively about non-traditional ways to get information into the hands of those who need it. So again, discussions about the interpretation of quantitative and qualitative data and packaging results in a meaningful way are really good examples. The end result can only be better for valuing everyone's unique input. Another opportunity for engagement is for patient and parent partners to co-author manuscripts and co-present study findings. So there's a good example of this that you may have seen on the timeline earlier. So one of our PFAC members, Donna Thompson, and PI Jan Willem Gorder will co-present a poster for the Child Bright Project and an instructional course on transition to adulthood at the American Academy for Cerebral Palsy and Developmental Medicine, which is in October in Cincinnati, Ohio. And the last point, and maybe the most important one, is reciprocal relationships. So we can check that the partnership is working for everyone by evaluating patient engagement and to ensure that the authenticity and the value is there. Connie, I'll turn it over to you to see if you had anything to add about how we continue our engagement in this next phase.
Yeah, thank you, Barb. I think just a couple of points to add, and so we have time for questions. But I really like the idea of the training, and I know, I can give a plug for Jan Willem has been. I've been working with Jan Willem and some of his team members to design a patient training program with Donna Thompson and a couple of others through the network. So look out for that, because we've really put a lot of effort into looking at how patient and parents would want to be trained for research and what kinds of things may be gaps that are missing and what we may need to help be better partners on a research project. The other thing that I would also want to mention is, and it goes back to the slide that Sonia, you had talked about in evaluating success of engagement and in the evaluation of outcomes. And I really want to emphasize the idea of including PFAC committee in that design and process of evaluation. And I think mainly so that we can understand the impact and how we might do better to improve what we're doing that might lead to better outcomes, because really that's the reason why we're on the committee in the first place. So involving PFAC committee into that is such a good idea. So I really like that a lot. So yeah, I think it looks great moving forward. So I'm looking forward to continuing my work on the committee.
Great, thanks. And I'll just add one more thing before, just because I hear a lot about training for patient and family partners, but I think training for staff and researchers just as equally important or more important on how to be doing this right, learning from families how to do it better.
And I think the practical examples really help to make it easier to incorporate into your practice, right? I mean, there's the theory learning, and then there's the sort of real life examples of how others have incorporated patient and family engagement.
Thank you, Barb. So this next page just shares a few of our related links today. Our Ready or Not project page on the Child Bright website, where we now have a link to the video that we mentioned earlier that was prepared for the Brainchild Partners Conference. So hopefully you can all get a chance to watch that after today. I've also put a link here for the planetree.org website that I mentioned with respect to partnership self-assessment tools. And finally, if you want to reach out to any of us, here is our contact information. And I think at this point, we'll turn it over to any of you who may have questions for us today.
Excellent. Well, Sonia, Barb, and Connie, thank you so much for sharing your experience. And really, I think what it underscores is that this whole idea of patient engagement throughout the research process is a learning process, and will take time to develop. And I think the strategy that you have employed, where you check in with the group and figure out what worked, what didn't work, and what you can do better, really is a great way to move forward. So yeah, so as was mentioned, we will open up the lines for a few minutes of discussion or questions. So again, we have two options. You can raise your hand or input your question via the question box. We have had a few roll in already, so I will get us started and give you a moment to think about what you want to ask. All right, so our first question comes from Doug Swanson and the group at Kids Brain Health. So the question he has is, in terms of patient or family engagement, what sort of strategies can be employed to keep people engaged in the long term, and especially those that perhaps are less committed or show initial great interest that dies down after a while, just due to the nature of the length of time that research projects take. Yeah, so I'll open that to any of you, Connie, Boyd, and Sonia. Feel free to weigh in.
Sure, I think Barb's going to weigh in a little bit here.
Yeah, so I have one thought, I guess. One of the things that we've tried to do is to be really understanding that is the reality, that people may still be interested, but just have to step away for a time. So that has happened a lot in our project, where people have been very upfront that they won't be able to attend some meetings, or they won't be able to respond to some things, and we're perfectly okay with that. I mean, that is the reality, and we are try to be as understanding as possible and try to offer whatever support we can. I mean, I think Sonia and I both, especially Sonia, is working closely with the patient and youth partners, but try to offer as much support as we can in any way. And often I think it's a one-on-one call that will help bring them back up to speed when they're ready to come back. That's my one thought about it. I don't know if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to agree that I think sort of like one-on-one contact when they're ready to sort of reorient them to things, if that's the case. Just as an example, actually, we've had a young person who's been, he's been away a bit this summer, and with school before that, hasn't participated in a little while, so he's kind of missed some more recent developments in the app product itself, and hasn't seen a version of the app in quite a while, not in its full form. So next week he's actually coming here physically to our office here at McMaster, where we'll get a chance to reconnect with him and walk through the app and reorient him and update him on what's been happening in the project.
I guess the other thing is that sometimes people do leave. There isn't really I mean, we hope that people want to stay for the duration of the project, but I mean, it happens that people leave. So we do have a bit of strategy for inviting new people too. I mean, there have been people who have joined us along the way, and some who have left along the way. So it's a reality. I
want to weigh into just with a thought or two, and I think part of it is to keep building your relationships and keep those relationships going, whether or not the person that in the long term, like may or may not be able to stay on one particular project, but keep those relationships up, and whether you have occasional seminars to keep them informed or ways to bring them back into the circle. If you can provide an initial way in which to keep people in your circles, then you can expect some flow in and out, but maybe in the long run, if you're still somewhat engaged with them, they might come back. So, or maybe, you think about things like mentorship or trying to connect people, connect patients with each other who are on the same projects to bring people up to speed. I mean, there are ways to keep people in your fold. So maybe that's a way to keep people longer term, even though they're not necessarily throughout the whole project.
Thanks. And we have a guest here in our room, actually. He's been quiet up until now, but I'm going to invite him to share his idea. It's Dr. Border.
Well, thank you so much. It's very exciting to share our experiences, and I think it has been said before that learning from each other and building the relationship is extremely important. I think I have learned also through other work that social media can be extremely helpful, because meeting times to set meeting times can be very hard, and to meet on social media allows for that flexibility, because you can then meet at your own time, right? You could go in the evening, or maybe, as I sometimes do, on a Sunday morning, share your thoughts and get some ideas out, or learn from others. As Connie just said, that it's also listening and learning from others that is extremely helpful and helps to build a relationship. And especially if you want to do that over a longer time of period, which is in our project, we're talking about 5-year project. That's a very long time. So we can't commit or ask people to commit for that long time. But hopefully they can continue the relationship for that time. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much for chiming in, Dr. Border. So we actually are getting quite a few good questions on our chat box today. So depending on everyone wants to stay around for a few minutes, maybe we can answer some more. But for now, let's go with one question from Lori. And so the question is, evidently, patients and researchers perhaps don't always agree on what's being researched, or maybe the conclusions that are being reached. In patient-oriented research, is there room for these types of dissenting opinions to be noted or recorded? But I guess more importantly, is there a way for to reach consensus, to get a clear path moving ahead and working together?
Again, I think I like to always think of not to think of parent partners or patient partners so differently from any other member of your team. So I think the same question could apply if researchers don't agree, or clinicians don't agree, or staff don't agree. I mean, that's part of the collaborative process, that you have a discussion with multidisciplinary people and you come to a consensus or a conclusion. So I don't see that as such a barrier. If you include partners as part of your team, then I think that helps to resolve that issue.
I think that the barrier is being able to create a culture that believes in that. Mm-hmm. Once you've got past that barrier, it shouldn't be an issue.
Yeah, and I want to say that I think also the research process like there, like I know I have a respect for the research process. So it'll take its course too. So the idea that the research is decisions are made for whatever reasons, and it's being moved along with all these people as players. I think the research process itself allows for that. I think Barb kind of answered that, but that's how I look at it, that I'm just adding value along that way rather than trying to create, total pivots in it.
Wonderful. Yeah, I think those are very considered responses. And yeah, I really appreciate the insight that you all bring. But yeah, I guess we'll end the discussion section there and just finish up with a few more slides, and that will conclude the webinar for today. So just a few next steps that you might want to consider when we send out the email in the next couple of days that details some of the slides, that has a link to this recording. We'll also include a link to participate in a survey. So feel free to relay any of your thoughts on today's session. But more importantly, if you have any additional training needs that you think would fit well with this type of delivery, please feel free to relay it in that venue, and we will hopefully be able to get that together for us in the next session. Secondly, again, just relay any sort of training needs that you might have. And if you are interested in looking at our previous sessions, they are all on the Talkbright website. Feel free to find the links and review them at your convenience. And again, if you need to get in touch with us, you can find us through our training URL, or you can just send me a note at the listed email address, or give me a call, and we can definitely chat about how you see training playing a bigger role in orienting both patients and researchers towards this idea of patient engagement in the research process. Thank you again. Thank you for sticking through with us to the end of today's session and the series. We hope it has been useful to you, as we've all learned quite a bit over the last few months in putting this together. Right. Thank you very much. Take care.